Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest with the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 333. We are covering Gaudium et Spes 52 on The Family Teaches Humanity. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican and frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about how there may be times to avoid kids, but we also need to protect the lives of the tiniest humans, i.e. no abortion, no infanticide, things like that. Today, we will conclude Chapter 1 of Part 2, which is on fostering the nobility of marriage in the family. And the point here is that marriage and the family are the foundation of society, so Christians need to live and support them. Paragraph 52 has 8 subparagraphs, which we'll read in 7 parts, so it's a little bit of a longer episode. A is about the family teaches humanity and should be protected. B, educate children to discern their vocation well. C, the family is the foundation of society. D, Christians need to promote marriage. E, we can use medical knowledge to better regulate births. F and G, we need specially trained priests and associations to help build up marriage. And finally, H, spouses must love following Jesus. So since that was so long, I'll repeat that A is about the family teaches humanity and should be protected. Let's read it. 52a. The family is a kind of school of deeper humanity. But if it is to achieve the full flowering of its life and mission, it needs the kindly community of minds and the joint deliberation of spouses, as well as the painstaking cooperation of parents in the education of their children. The active presence of the father is highly beneficial for their formation. The children, especially the younger among them, need the care of their mother at home. This domestic role of hers must be safely preserved through the legitimate social progress of women, though the legitimate social progress of women should not be underrated on that account. One interesting thing about human beings that's not explicitly in here, but it's kind of implied in the council, is that when we are born, we are very wimpy. I was with my niece when she was, 13, 14 months old, and her walking was about the same as cows or deer when they're like 1 day old. She was walking okay, but when you see cows or deer or other animals like that, they're walking that well within a day or two. It's a different reality for humans. We have to take a long time to develop. And for this, we need the collaboration of the various spouses, the 2 spouses, to build that up. And we need both the father and the mother. It's noted here that we can't have marriages or situations without the father just abandoning him. And we should support the mother at the home. One of the things it notes is that shouldn't restrict women's ability to grow and get educated and things like that. And once the children are beyond nursing age, I think today we would also talk about the possibility of dads being at home. People tend to marry in the same kind of education, things like that, but different jobs can have very different salaries. I could imagine a couple where the dad has something like a history or philosophy master's degree, and the mom is a medical doctor and makes several times what the dad would make using his degree. In that case, it might be better for the family and their judgment for dad to stay home with the kids once they're weaned off of nursing and things like that. I'm not making any specific judgment here. I'm just kind of giving a principle to think about that goes beyond what the council says, but is in line with what it's talking about. Moving on to 52b, it talks about how we need to educate children to discern the vocation well. B, children should be so educated that as adults they can follow their vocation, including a religious one, with a mature sense of responsibility and can choose their state of life. If they marry, they can thereby establish their family in favorable moral, social, and economic conditions. Parents or guardians should, by prudent advice, provide guidance to their young with respect to founding a family, and the young ought to gladly listen. At the same time, no pressure, direct or indirect, should be put on the young to make them enter marriage or choose a specific partner. We need maturity to follow any vocation. Many of the issues of religious life in the 60s and 70s were often due to a lack of maturity or lack of good discernment in that maturity. Not every single one, but a decent portion did come from that. That's why today, when you look at seminaries or religious houses, they have a lot of they have a big psychological test when you start. And one of the main things we're looking for in that test is that this person is psychologically mature enough to take on the commitments of the priesthood of religious life. Beyond religious life, I think a lot of marriages have been ruined by immaturity. You find one side of the couple who still wants to live like they're 19 years old and the other one is actually matured, and it breaks up the marriage. And parents need to instill maturity, right? We need to show how they deal with issues. This is shown an example most of all. We look to our parents when we're little kids to show how do we deal with issues. And if our parents show maturity in dealing with issues, that helps us to know how we might want to deal with them. As you grow up, obviously, some of this is going to become more explicit. We're going to say, oh, like this or the specific thing. And finally, parents should not force a specific vocation. It notes here not marrying a certain person, but it's also the same thing to force your son or daughter into a specific religious community or your son into the priesthood if that is not his call. Let's move on to 52C, that the family is still the foundation of society. In Catholic social doctrine, the unity of society is the family, not the individual, and that's important to avoid the individualism of our culture. Let's read it. 52C. Thus the family, in which the various generations come together and help one another grow wiser and harmonize personal rights with the other requirements of social life, is the foundation of society. All those, therefore, who exercise influence over communities and social groups should work effectively for the welfare of marriage and the family. Public authority should regard it as a sacred duty to recognize, protect, and promote their authentic nature, to shield public morality and to favor the prosperity of home life. The right of parents to beget and educate their children in the bosom of the family must be safeguarded. Children, too, who unhappily lack the blessing of family should be protected by prudent legislation and various undertakings to assist by the help they need. Assisted by the help they need. This one is a pretty straightforward one with what I gave at the introduction about the social unit of society being the family. Here, we need to think about this also in respect to how social and political leaders promote this. This is important for us as Catholics to think, okay, how do our political leaders, how do our social leaders promote the family? And that's a real thing. And, this idea of respecting parents and the rights of their children, how they choose to educate them and things like that, whether they choose to homeschool or send them to private school, we're not going to force them into a state education. Moving on to 52D, Christians need to promote marriage. Let's read it. Christians, redeeming the present time and distinguishing external realities from their changing expressions, should actively promote the values of marriage and the family, both by the example of their own lives and by cooperation with other men of goodwill. Thus, when difficulties arise, Christians will provide, on behalf of family life, those necessities and helps which are suitably modern. To this end, the Christian instincts of the faithful, the upright moral consciences of men, and the wisdom and experience of persons versed in the sacred sciences will have much to contribute. So this is important how we as Christians need to promote marriage. It is not something that's just kind of like, accidental or things like that. No, it's an important part of our Christian mission to promote marriage. And the biggest way is the positive example of marriages. Not only the ones who live it, but also to put them forward to young people and so they can see what they want what we want them to see the good of marriage. And it knows we can collaborate with people who aren't in 100% agreement. Many people who collaborate with in the U.S. would still be promoting the possibility of things like divorce and contraception, which would go against the Catholic ethics of marriage. But Catholics and even the church can still collaborate with them. And finally, it notes the idea of talking about social sciences and other, psychology and things like that, and how they can help marriage. We can do studies in sociology, studies in psychology that can realize the good of marriage, and also can be something great to help couples really live their marriage better. Father Paul Marks, the founder of Human Life International, HLI, in his autobiography, he notes that before he founded HLI, he was a psychology professor at a Catholic university at his monastery. He's a Benedictine. Exactly which monastery has escaped me. But he had one class which was basically like psychology of marital communication. And it was the favorite class of all the students at the college. And what he would do is he would explain how to better resolve conflicts once you get married, how to think of the right person to marry, things like that in a psychological thing. And that's a valuable thing to have. He joked and said it was kind of marriage prep before marriage prep was normal, and things like that. But that's the reality. So 52E is talking about medical knowledge, and then we can use it to regulate births. This idea of thinking, okay, we can know when the woman is fertile, when she's going to ovulate, and a couple can avoid sexual activity at that time. So let's read it. E. Those two who are skilled in other sciences, notably the medical, biological, social, and psychological, can considerably advance the welfare of the marriage and the family, along with the peace of conscience, if by pooling their efforts they labor to explain more thoroughly the various conditions favoring proper regulation of births. Now, as I noted, this is just science development, but also how we communicate, how we express it. At the time in the 1960s, I think the main method of natural family planning or fertility awareness was simply the rhythm method. The rhythm method is not super effective. It doesn't have, especially women who have irregular cycles or who have very long or very short cycles, it can be an issue. And they can have kids unexpectedly when they want to avoid it. One of the things is that certain people were inspired by this and inspired by Humanae Vitae, and they went and studied women's cycles, extensively. And from that, they developed much better methods of fertility awareness to see, okay, when is the woman fertile and how can we look at this? And so now, these are 99% effective if you use them right. Now, the challenge compared to other methods of preventing conception is that these ones require that the couple refrain from sexual activity for like a week, a month, or something like that. Sometimes a little shorter if it's not as urgent to avoid pregnancy or things, and sometimes a little longer if it's more cautious. But that's the idea. And so not only do we need to do the science for that, we need to figure out how to tell people about that. Getting towards the end here, we have F and G, which are about specially trained priests and associations to help build up marriage. Let's read them. F. It devolves on priests duly trained about family matters to nurture the vocation of spouses by a variety of pastoral means, by preaching God's word, by liturgical worship, and by other spiritual aids to conjugal and family life, to sustain them sympathetically and patiently in difficulties, and to make them courageous through love, so that families which are truly illustrious can be formed. G. Various organizations, especially family associations, should try by their programs to instruction and action to strengthen young people and spouses themselves, particularly those recently wed, and to train them for family, social, and apostolic life. This is kind of an interesting idea to think of priests who are duly trained or specially trained for marriage ministry. Sometimes it's not like super extensive particular training, it's just a short thing. I know, for example, a number of priests in my community are some of the priests who run a lot of the marriage prep classes, marriage preparation classes for different dioceses. I know in Our Lady of Bethesda, which is the Legionary Retreat Center in the DC area, Our Lady of Bethesda would run, I think, like a third of the marriage prep in the diocese, in the Archdiocese of Washington or something like that, or a quarter. I don't remember the exact portion, but it was a notable proportion. And that is something that can help in these aspects. We also need to help them when there's difficulties, and we need priests who are super trained in certain specific areas. And then Gia is talking about all these wonderful lay organizations that promote marriage. I don't know how many of them existed at the time, but there's a whole bunch today, like Worldwide Marriage Encounter and things like that, that really promote good marriage. A lot of them are very helpful for when you're struggling in marriage to try and rekindle that love or things like that. Now, our final subparagraph H is about spouses must live following Jesus. Let's read it. 52H. Finally, let the spouses themselves, made to the image of the living God and enjoying the authentic dignity of persons, be joined to one another in equal affection, harmony of mind, and the work of mutual sanctification. Thus, following Christ, who is the principle of life, by the sacrifice and joys of their vocation, and through their faithful love, married people can become witnesses of the mystery of love, which the Lord revealed to the world by his dying and his rising up to life again. That's an interesting way to end a chapter on marriage. Married people can be this witness of the Lord who died and rose again. That is a wonderful way to look at marriage, where the couples are making little sacrifices, and those sacrifices are showing people in the world the love of Jesus. The spouses need to work together for sanctification, and this is based on being the image of likeness of God, and working for sanctification is often sacrifices, and to do these with Jesus and in imitation of Jesus. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Gaudium et Spes, paragraph 53, on what is culture, and that will start chapter 2 of part 2, which is more on the idea of culture. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, like playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. Amen.